What's up, everybody? Coast to Coast podcast here coming at you. New edition. And you may think that, hey, the season started because UNC had Media Day. Well, you might be right. I wouldn't argue with you. I am Joey Powell. We are brought to you by Johnny T shirt and Congruity. With me, as always, Sean Moran, Sherrell, McMillan, the two guys you've come to get used to. And they're the ones that actually bring the insight on the show. I'm just going to be the guy keeping the car in between the lines. But I'm grateful that they're here, and we got a lot to talk about. Since the last time we did a show, UNC has had visitors on campus. The most recent two were Niko Bundalo, a 6'10 power forward out of Napa. He does attend prolific prep. He's number 30-ish, 30, 35 in the rankings, depending on which service you're using. And then also the surprise was that Caleb Wilson canceled his visit this past weekend to Alabama and opted to come to Chapel Hill for an unofficial, which means it was on their dime. Caleb Wilson, top 10 kid by all services, 6'9 power forward from Atlanta. Sherrell, I'm going to come to you first, man. Tell me a little bit first about Niko Bundalo's visit, and then we can kind of morph into discussions about Caleb Wilson.
Well, first, for those on the YouTube audience, like I didn't get the message that we were being clean shaven for this particular podcast, and I look a little haggard. So excuse me while my co-hosts are nice and freshly shaven, and I look like I do.
I can't grow facial hair, bro. So I don't. It's not even. This is. I can't take credit for that. I'm sorry.
Okay, I got you. So Bundalo came in again. Joy did a great job introing him from Prolific Prep. He's actually from Ohio, that region. Spent pretty much all his life there, even though he is of Serbian descent. Played some on the Serbian U17 team this past summer, and then decided to transfer out to Prolific in Napa. I guess in mid-August, something like that. At any rate, he's taken a few official visits already. He's got Kansas and Kentucky coming up. Kentucky is one that he didn't actually schedule. He just said they were going to have the last visit no matter what, which is always kind of a kind of a telltale sign, perhaps, of what a recruit may be thinking. I don't think I've ever heard a player say like, "I'm saving this last visit for a school, even though I don't have a date." So that was very unique. Travis Brandon did some great reporting on him. Yeah, he came in on Thursday to UNC. A very quiet visit because he's a quiet kid. I think him and Nick Media, very, very tight knit. You don't hear much about their recruitment. You don't see many interviews with them. So we are efforting to talk to him, but we haven't as of yet. Um, as you know, these things always go great. Official visits are official visits. Now they've become more of a chance to talk to people in person to get to know them a little bit better, and then kind of use it as the kind of next stage of negotiation. Whereas, as we said last week or 2 weeks ago, it used to be kind of the closing thing. Now it's kind of a next step. So he's like I said, he's got Kentucky and Kansas left, and then he wants to make a decision before his high school season starts. So for most of these guys who are at national schools, that's basically this month. So I would expect a decision, from him end of the month, very early November, at the latest.
And we've talked about this domino scenario of one guy picking, and then that takes up a spot, so somebody else commits, and that takes up a spot. Then all of a sudden, you get this kind of momentum of players that have been kind of staying back and staying out of the advancement of their recruitment. And now all of a sudden things start changing quickly. And as Sherrell points out, when you start talking about guys that are in that top 30, top 25, top 15 range, that makes a big difference. I'm not sure you're going to see a ton of the top 10, top 15 kids jump immediately, but that could change. So the other one, and again, this is a big development this past weekend. Caleb Wilson decided to come back to Chapel Hill. Sherrill, I want you to do a couple of things for us here before you describe the visit and again, what you knew to happen. How big of a development is this for North Carolina with regard to their pursuit of Caleb Wilson?
I would say it's I don't want to say huge, but very important, very big, because basically our whole thing is even though I don't want to say we poo poo visits, they are indicator. They're a good tell of how serious a player is in a school. Schools will have guys in all the time for visits. It doesn't necessarily mean school X is super excited about a specific player just because he visits. But if a player takes the time to visit, then more than often than not, that means they're very interested in the school. And for Wilson, Unofficial visits. So the difference between an official and an official is basically the school pays for an official, and the players and their families pay for an unofficial. Now, everybody has different financial situations, but bringing a family up from Atlanta to stay 2 nights on a football weekend in the Chapel Hill Durham area, while it might not break the budget, it's not cheap either. So there's a financial component that says, wow, you're willing to spend money and time over the course of 2.5 days to come up and visit Carolina again. So that again shows really strong interest. From a Carolina perspective, back in I would say June when we were doing updates, we were about to put him in the long shot category. Now we had AJ Dybantsa fairly in there, and that changed because Wilson and his father said they just hadn't really talked to North Carolina a ton during the month of June. But right before we published the story, I think it was like July 2nd or July 3rd, he was like, "Hey, it's picking back up with UNC," and just slowly but surely, UNC has stayed in the race. And I think the in-home visit that they did with him, I believe it was September 17th, 16th, something like that, was pretty big. His dad said it was big. Sources told us it was big. And I think that's propelled UNC to get this second visit because, again, he officially visited back in February. Loved it, had glowing things to say. A lot of people thought UNC was in the lead back then. As I said, things kind of died down during the summer, during the spring, and now they're picking up. So it's a big development, especially because at the moment, Georgia Tech is the only other official visit he has scheduled. So we know his time frame he has said before, maybe the winter, but we know those things can get accelerated and moved up. So a visit to a school that you already liked unexpectedly could be a catalyst for one of those things. So we'll just have to wait and see.
And depending on what tea leaves you read or, what vent you're listening through, apparently his parents are fans of the environment in North Carolina. So, um, yeah, I'm not going to confirm that, not a reporter, but depending on what you read around his recruitment, it seems that there are a lot of things that could be working positively behind the scenes from North Carolina. Sure. Last thing before we move on to the next thing with Sean. How important is it for these players now to be able to see North Carolina in an official visit? Since they're practicing, how important is it for them to be able to see, the entire team doing what a normal practice looks like? I know they were doing team functions beforehand, but the NCAA wouldn't allow them to call that, air quotes, practice. Now they've got a full-on practice, and there's practice plans and the whole nine go on. Does that help for players to really see what the environment's going to look like?
I think it does, and I think it's really germane to the class of 2025 because, as we said before, the proof points for Hubert Davis and getting guys to the NBA and playing a style that's really fast and having athletic wings. He hasn't had that before because the players who he has committed to do that are just now enrolling in school in Drake Powell and Ian Jackson. So there's been some time since Ian Jackson committed, and it's like, man, once those guys finally get on campus, it'll show people that UNC is open for business for like one and done guys and super athletic players like those two. And so this was the first chance, really, these practices for someone from the outside to see it. So Hubert Davis can go to Caleb Wilson and say, "Look, man, I've got two guys I think are going to be lottery picks, and they're really really good." He can say that all he wants, but until they got on campus and start practice and start games, he can't show it. So I think for 2025, it was really really important. Same thing with Dybantsa. You can say it, but until you can really show it in practice, it's I don't say it's hard to believe, but you have to have a little faith. And I think now that they've seen it, they can move forward with their assessment of whether or not it fits them.
Awesome. Anything else you'll say about these visits before I flip it over and talk to Sean a little bit about some scouting that he's done in person recently?
I'll say I wish we could have updates the second they leave campus. I really, really wish we could, but we can't. So we are working on it. By the time you listen to this, we could have talked to them, but there's a stronger than likely chance that we haven't yet. So we are trying to do that, and hopefully we will.
And again, we don't want to poo-poo anybody's enthusiasm for where North Carolina stands in recruiting, but we also don't want to totally gas anybody up, right? So I think, like Sherrell said, Wilson being back on campus is obviously a positive for North Carolina. Yeah, having these other top 30, top 50 recruits show up and consider UNC is obviously a positive for North Carolina. I would just say, as we've gone along this recruiting cycle, I think folks 2 months ago felt like, and we talked about it here, like, hey, the sky's falling. Well, you're, was it Roy used to say, you're never get too high, never get too low. So do that in this same scenario. If things develop and things change, and players may commit or drop UNC, I see we'll be all over it and have the info for you. Sean actually spent some time in Inglewood this past weekend, which is what he does when he lives on the West Coast. We send Sean to random places in California and say, "Hey, go watch hoop." No, he was not there for a Kendrick Lamar garden party. Um, yes, because he's in Inglewood, he's officially up to no good. Shout out Sherrell for the Dr. Dre reference. Sean, you spent some time actually seeing AJ Dybantsa up close, and I want you to just kind of talk a little bit about the good, the bad, what jumps out at you when you see him up close versus watching him on tape, and then if there's anything else that you feel like you gleaned from this time and seeing him in a small gym, share that with folks. I think this might be a little pretty interesting segment for people to hear.
Yeah, got to watch him Thursday night. He was in the area for 2 games, Wednesday and Thursday, for kind of a 100+ high school tournament event over the weekend. Hot gym, small gym in Inglewood. Paul Pierce was there showing up where he went to high school. Trevor Ariza was there with his son playing the game before. So it was a for early October and a kind of a fall event. It had a pretty good atmosphere. In terms of Dybantsa, he had 18 points. I think you saw the physical ability. Even before the game started, he was clearly taller than both Paul Pierce and Ariza, so giving that 6'9" plus, definite legitimacy. And it was an easy 18 in terms of he had some highlight reel dunks. I think defensive rebounding was probably the most impressive, of just when he decided, hey, I'm going to get this one, between the size and the length as well as the explosiveness. He was just going to reach up and grab it, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. Unfortunately, I'd say a lot of the other guys were going maybe a little harder than him throughout the game on both teams. So he came out of the second half, hit a jump shot from about 12, 15 feet. And I said, okay, he's going to turn it up right now. And unfortunately, kind of just was content running up and down a little bit. The opponent, Jason Crow Jr., top 10 5-star player in the 2026 class, he was guarded Dybantsa on defense, and he was putting up 36 points on offense. So he was, playing with a lot of effort. But once again, I think you could see just the physical specimen that Dybantsa is, in terms of the size and the profile. Defensively, when he wanted to, he could, he could lock somebody down at half court. Offensively, when he did pick up full steam, or when he did decide to attack the basket, he was going to get there in 2 to 3 long steps, or strides or dribbles. So it was pretty impressive just watching him in person. But from a skill perspective, the shot definitely needs some work. He was around 33% in AAU, but when he was, whether it was 3-pointers, I think he was 0 for 3, or pull-ups, he was left, right, kind of all over the place. So, I think for me, as you always watch shooting, is he missing short or long, or is he missing to the side? So just from a skill perspective, shooting, tightening up the dribble, even though at 6'9", the handle is pretty good for that size. But once again, just trying to project 2, 3 years and when they're in college or the NBA, I think over the past 10, 15 years, we've seen a lot of very hype prospects. And I think it's very rare for that hype, to turn into something in year 6 or 7, where it's first team All NBA or something like that. So I always just want to be a little more measured than maybe I was when I was watching Andrew Wiggins back in the day, or somebody like that. But overall, it was a fun game, and good to see him in person in that type of atmosphere.
So one of the things I think I'd love for you to elaborate on, he looks to me at this age, right, just his last year in high school, looks almost like a creative player in 2K. Um, how can you kind of compare him with peers? Because again, he's not always going to be playing against a Crow like he did when you saw him. But how do you compare him physically with some of his peers, and do you think that's going to be something that he's actually had to work on? Where he's actually gone against guys that have the same physical attributes he does, or is that the type of thing that might actually be a little bit of a shock for him when he takes that next step to the collegiate level?
I mean, for him, he's been playing the 17 under Nike EYBL since he was a freshman. You can tell just by looking at him, just the the youth, the youngness of him in terms of stepping up a class and where he's at. So from a strength perspective, he'll definitely fill out and be able to grow from EYBL and playing on the USA basketball circuit. He's gone against some tough competition, but I think that's always the thing that is tough to truly project to that NBA level now, and everybody is maybe not, at that side, but they're pretty close, or you're going to be playing against much taller, athletic players in general. So that's where, once again, that skill set becomes really, really important. And you go to a guy like Jason Tatum, who got to watch a ton in high school, and his skill level was so elite, and that's been able to carry over, even though maybe the athleticism sometimes was a knock on him. But once again, I think nothing negative, but just something to continue, for him to improve on in high school and college to get to that stage where everybody is projecting him already. And I think it's always good just to try to dial into, that picture of where they could be in a few years, because it's so easy to get caught up in all the hype that comes around these kids, and especially with the recruitments. Just to say, hey, there are some things that this guy needs to work on. But once again, I don't think you're going to get Paul Pierce or other guys coming out to watch a game for guys that aren't that hyped either. So
You kind of answered it, but that's where I was going with my question. Like, hot take time. Like, you have to give an opinion. Is he like a true generational, which we overuse, but like, is he that kind of guy? Is he that kind of player where, once every 10 years, once every 20-year type player? Because as you said, we media fans, people who cover this stuff, everybody kind of get a little hyped up when somebody's ranked number one, and maybe push them to be more than they can be or more than they are at the moment. Like, do you think he has that in him, or like, what do you see him right now, and what do you see him is in maybe 5 years?
I think he does have that potential, which, once again, when he came onto the scene and he was playing really well in the 17 under EYBL, that was a put this guy, move him up a class, and he's going to be number one or maybe even number one last year. But as I was watching him, I think he'll have a great freshman year. But once again, I think depending on the situation, there are things that he definitely needs to work on. So it could be one of those where maybe there are some games he struggles, and he doesn't live up to that hype in certain situations. But then there's going to be the dunks and the defense and how easy it is to project up. So I think going into the game, definitely believed he was one of those once in a generation players, which I guess now we've seen several of those from our times covering the recruiting scene. But watch him in person, it just did give me a little bit more pause in terms of just, hey, there are some things from a skill level that, once again, not negatives, but things that he does need to work on and continue improving to get to that elite level, just because it is so tough to actually get there.
I wanted to ask you that because I saw him back in December at Chick-fil-A, and I kind of I don't like
You
to
mean a
make
Chick-fil-A event, or like at an actual Chick-fil-A
no.
getting
He
chicken
was
minis?
he was at Chick-fil-A. He got a number one with a large fry and Chick-fil-A sauce. No, at Chick-fil-A tournament in Lexington, Kentucky, every December. So we went down there and watched, and I don't know what I was looking for. I wanted to be overwhelmed, and I was thoroughly whelmed, I guess. There wasn't that intensity that you were talking about. And again, it's one game, so I don't want to make a grand uh, assumption about him as a player over one game. But looking at some of his AU games and looking at some of the film, it does kind of stand out to me sometimes that like I'd like him to play just a little bit with more of an edge consistently. And that's probably something you can say about a lot of people. But when you get to this level, you're going to get nitpicked when you're the number one player in the class. And so I wanted a little bit more, and I was just kind of like, huh, this is the guy that everybody is saying is the next thing. And I'd seen him before at Peach Jam a couple of years ago, and he looked good. But at that point, you can only kind of go by age. Like, let's see where he's at when he's 16, 17. And there's been development. And again, this is the number one player in the class. I respect all the people who do scouting, the consensus number one player. But I just was left wanting just a little bit more.
Yeah, I
Well,
think that's fair. One sorry, Joe. One thing on that, just kind of watching. You got home from the game and you see what was on YouTube, and once again, some of the dunks and plays were pretty jaw dropping in terms of like only one player on the court was going to be able to do that. So you watch that and you say, oh, you know, amazing. But once again, when you're watching kind of the full 32, things kind of pop out. But one thing was his passing that I thought was better than I expected in terms of being very unselfish. Had a good vision, was looking for teammates. Also, body language. While the intensity would have liked him to ramp it up a little more, body language in terms of being truly excited for his teammates and some of that which you don't always see at that level. And then also there's a few times hot gym, lot of chaos going on in the side, and the scoreboard went off 2 times, and both times he was quick to just repeat the exact time and score, to the scoreboard operator. So obviously mentally he's processing things pretty quick and has a good memory. But to me, it'll be interesting to watch, just in terms of how that development does work. And for instance, if he did end up at BYU, it would kind of be, hey, you know, he's going to have a good season, but he'll probably just get lost a little bit in terms of, one, not a championship level team, but also, probably be a little more under the radar instead of getting nitpicked like at some other schools.
so I think one of the big things about Dybantsa that Sean has kind of reaffirmed a little bit, and Sherrell mentioned a second ago, is he's a consensus number one amongst his class. Johnny T-shirt is the consensus number one among us who need to buy UNC gear at any point in time. Johnny T-shirt has been, they've never had to reclass either way, not up or back. Johnny T-shirt has always kind of been first in their class from beginning to end, and they have the best customer service you ever ask for. Call them up, go see them, hit them on the web. Either way, Johnny T-shirt is going to leave you reinvigorated, and they're going to make you feel good about capitalism and transactional business in America. We love Johnny T-shirt. They've been such loyal supporters of IC and our content, the work we do. We just want our listeners to give them the same support. Not making this up. I don't feel strongly about a lot of things, but Johnny T-shirt's one of those, and they're good folks, and we just want you guys to give them some patronage. So as we get, Sherrell, I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
Well, since we're devoting time to it, it's like Franklin Street that we all knew growing up, and everything always changes. We understand that it's going to be churn, but like some of the historic places are gone and they're not coming back, and we don't want that to happen to Johnny T-shirt. It's been there for as long as I can remember, so let's keep it going.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Johnny T-shirt is probably, I know it's multi-generational for graduates and people that have spent time in Chapel Hill, or people that are just fans that go to the Smith Center, or go to games and want to see all the different gear that Johnny T-shirt has. All that to say, give them some love. JohnnyT-shirt.com. They'll take care of you. They've got new UNC basketball gear hitting the shelves as I speak. Make sure you see them. Make sure you go talk to them. They'll probably have they've already got great prices, but they'll probably have some stuff that you haven't seen yet. So premium subscribers know you get that extra 10 off. Go ahead and use it, and tell them that the Coast to Coast sent you. Tell them that Sherrell McMillan threatened you with a shillelagh to the back of the neck if you did not go spend money at Johnny T-shirt. We appreciate them. We'll take a quick break here. Let the national guys run some advertisements to help keep this content free for you. We'll be right back talking a little bit more about UNC basketball here on the Coast to Coast podcast on InsideCarolina.com. Glad you guys are with us tonight. I'm Joey Powell for Inside Carolina. We're brought to you by Johnny T-shirt, who I just talked about, and Congruity. Sean Moran and Sherrell McMillan with me, as always. So, guys, Media Day was this past weekend. And that's usually, I think a lot of folks probably don't anticipate Media Day until all of a sudden, IC's flooding the zone with coverage. But the cool thing about Media Day, I think, is this is the first time you actually get to hear from Hubert Davis about his team because he hasn't done any interviews, to my knowledge, since April until Media Day came up. So he talks a little bit about his team. Anytime in the world of the transfer portal, plus you have the change of getting new freshmen on campus and getting them acclimated and getting to see how they're going to perform. So there's a lot to talk about. And while it may seem like there are still some folks that ask terrible questions, or maybe there's still some things out there that the diehard IC subscriber and UNC fan already knows, it is good to get that first introduction to the class. And so, kind of coming away from that, you also had a chance that I see you got to watch some of practice. All of that stuff is going to be on the premium message boards, interviews with just about every single player, especially the guys that are new to campus. You probably want to go listen to those, get accustomed to those guys. You might hear some things you like. I think they've all got unique personalities, and anytime you get somebody new, it's a chance for you to develop a new player to follow. So I share all that. The big thing I took away from IC's coverage this past weekend is, guys, it seems like there's a new 3-second rule in Chapel Hill. And I do not mean the old get your giant behind out of the painted area 3-second rule. What I'm hearing is Hubert Davis is now telling these guys that when that ball, you get your hands on the ball out of the basket, you got 3 seconds to get it up and get it on the backboard, or it's a turnover. We have heard that they want to push pace. We have surmised that pushing pace would probably be the best fit for this team, considering what their makeup is. Sherrell, I'm going to ask you, when you hear that Hubert Davis is running a 3-second rule and pushing pace that much in practice, what comes to your mind?
Honestly, Roy Williams comes to mind. It really, I will go back to something we heard right when Hubert Davis got the job, was that what he wanted to do to the Carolina program was not change it, was not overhaul it, was not tear it down and rebuild it from the studs, was just to renovate it. And I feel like because of personnel for the first couple of years, that renovation kind of went room by room. It wasn't kind of wholesale. And now that this is pretty much his roster, his players, 100%, minus RJ Davis, although he was the lead recruiter for RJ Davis. So you can probably count him as a Hubert Davis guy almost too. He's played more for Hubert Davis than he did for Roy Williams by far. So all that to say, like, he's got his players, he's got his style. He's had multiple years to recruit, and it just makes me think that this is the final vision, kind of what he wants to do and what it will look like. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect because there's still a couple of things on the roster I bet they wish they could add or change, but it's pretty close. And so when I hear that, I kind of smile because it was rough there for a couple of years of just kind of lots of pounding the ball into the hardwood and not a lot of movement and walking it up the court and the tempo not being what I think people who follow this program are used to. There are certain things that are, I think, part of UNC's identity, and obviously family and the history of Coach Smith and alley oops and point to the passer, four corners, those kinds of things. I think tempo, because of Roy Williams' tenure at Carolina, is right up there. And so having Carolina teams that didn't play with a ton of pace was weird to adjust to. But I think if he's truly getting back to that, it'll be a welcome sight. And as you said, it's what best fits the personnel that he has this year. So those were kind of my thoughts. It's like, oh, okay, this is what he wants it to look like.
Sean, I'm going to ask you, I know you love that, point per 40 metric. Well, it seems like North Carolina is going to have a lot more possessions this year to work with. Do you think that that's, we mentioned earlier, we feel like that best fits their player skill profile. Do you think that's going to be the key to winning more games? Is this going to be back to Roy Williams' status of, well, we're going to score more than you, so whatever happens defensively happens? How do you anticipate this ramped up tempo and seriously increased possession number? How do you anticipate that helping this team?
Well, last year they're, I think, 38th in tempo. 41st in tempo and 38th in average possession length. To Sherrell's point, I think we're always, or at least we've talked a lot about identity in terms of what is their specific identity over the years, and always would love pace to be part of that. One, I think it's great with recruiting, even though everybody says they're playing playing fast, even if they might be one of the slowest teams in the country. But I think just being able to wear people down as well as get easy baskets. So excited to hopefully see that. Obviously, last year, our defense was a strong suit, but I do think especially from that 1 to 4 position, and even at the 5 in terms of a lot of rotating pieces of guys can go really hard, more possessions, just a little bit more ability to utilize players, just because they're going quicker and harder. Obviously, you don't want to see the defense drop off a cliff in terms of that efficiency that they did show, and a lot of that will be personnel and how do they adjust to what Hebert wants to do. But I think from an offensive standpoint, it definitely makes a lot of sense. I think it'll, especially with Elliot Cadeau, will create easier baskets, which I know have been tough to come by over the years. And when they did happen, especially last year, they were often celebrated. But I think it'll lead to that, or even kickouts on the wings, whether it's Tyson or the freshman as well. So I'm excited to see it. Hopefully, it does. It isn't just something that happens a few games early in the season, and then it goes back to what it has been. But push the pace, put the pressure, be the aggressor. That's always how I love to watch UNC play.
All right, I'm gonna get you over a barrel here for a second, but I want you to answer this question. All right, is running tempo better for North Carolina, even if it means an increased number of turnovers per game?
Yes, because ideally those turnovers are still coming at you're not significantly increasing based on if you're looking at a possessions per game basis. But I still think the easier baskets will allow for maybe less shots that are coming within the last 5 to 6 seconds, and those are more forced. So even if it's slightly more on the turnover side, I do think um, once again, and one thing to watch is, are they passing the ball or are they dribbling the ball and getting it passed? Because if you're passing, I think that's going to help, especially move the ball quickly in that decision making process. Versus sometimes we've seen, in years past, RJ grab a rebound and he's taking it straight up, or 3-on-1, nobody's passing the ball. So I think it goes back to how are they executing on those 3-on-2, 2-on-1 type of situations. But with quick ball movement, I definitely take a few more turnovers because I think that'll lead to easier baskets and, in general, increased offensive efficiency.
You're a gentleman and a scholar for answering that question when I put you on the spot like that. I appreciate it. And that leads us into our continued series of player profiles for this year. One of the things that we started a couple episodes back was we're going back and looking at the players on this roster 2 at a time and anticipating what we feel like sometimes their ceiling and their floor can be for North Carolina. We're also trying to analyze what they have to be for North Carolina to reach the goals that they're going to set for themselves, and probably did when they officially opened practice. So one of the ones we want to talk about, coming back for his sophomore year, Elliot Cadeau. Sean, you mentioned a second ago, I think an increased tempo is really going to help Elliot. But I think also we recognized last year he was not his usual self when he wasn't hitting jump shots. I think he was allowing defenses to sag a little bit and maybe cheat a little bit and not guard him as much when he wasn't taking jump shots. Obviously, that's going to be an area that he's looking to improve. Sean, I'm going to stay with you. What is the one thing that you feel like Elliot Cadeau has to be for this team to succeed this year? Is it more of a dictator of that pace? Is it somebody who's care of the ball, or is it somebody who just is a 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 facilitator?
I think we all know, we can't. What we saw in the Alabama game, that can't happen in terms of just being able to put a 5-man on them and just play off. So that'll be the thing that everybody's trying to push them on early in terms of other teams and game plan. But I think for this season and this season of Cadeau, you started to see, I think, that the leadership aspect blossom as he went through the year and got more comfortable around the guys and be more vocal. So I think that is one thing I'd say that you'll want to see on the floor. But I think as long you don't need him to score 15 to 20 points per game, right? Especially with that talent. So I think you just want to see him continuing to stay aggressive, but also he was forced to be very one-dimensional in terms of his, "I'm going to beat you off the dribble and attack," and then soon, after a while, teams started either playing off of him or trying to force him to the left, just because that first step is so quick. So I think once again, if he can, even if it's not one, you want to see improvement from the 19% from 3-point line, but say he's not a 35% 3-point shooter, if he can be respectable, but more importantly, I think get confidence in that dribble pull up from 15 that we talked about a lot of time, which we did see at the beginning of that Alabama game. If you have that, then you're not going to be able to play, that 5-man or 4-man. Or, what is he doing off the ball in terms of cutting, setting picks, which he was doing before he got trucked by Mark Sears in that game, and I don't think he probably did it afterwards. But once again, what's he doing off the ball? Because he is so dangerous, and I think probably last year when we were doing this, thought maybe his assist rate would be higher, the assists per game would be higher, but at the same time, in terms of what he took off of RJ's load from a ball handling, and I think how that helped RJ turn into that scorer that UNC needed him, and we all thought he could be. I still think that was a huge aspect of last year, even if the numbers didn't bear it out for Cadeau. So I would see an increase in points and assists just on traditional stats, but I think the main thing going back to pace will be get him the ball off the rebound, push it up, and he's going to be able to hit Tyson for a three, Jackson or Drake to go on the basket, RJ, et cetera. So him just playing quarterback is going to be, one of the key parts to how the offense goes this year.
Sherrell, describe for me what it looks like when Elliot Cadeau is at his best with regard to this team. I don't mean, Elliot Cadeau goes out and gets a triple-double with 40 points. I mean, what is the best what does he look like? So I'm telling you, when fans are watching UNC for the first time this year and they see Elliot Cadeau do X, Y, Z, those are the things that really signify, okay, he's taking the next step.
Well, you talk about the things that make great coaches is that they adapt their philosophy around or make it work for their players. Their best players are the most important players. And I think you can make an argument that Elliot Cadeau is as important as anyone on UNC's roster because, as you said, he is kind of the quarterback, the conductor. So him in the open court, if they're able to play at the speed that they want to play with, I think he's going to have a fantastic year just because his brightest moments in college basketball, in my opinion, last year as a freshman, were when he had plenty of space. He was pushing tempo, as Sean said, and he was finding guys, open. Think about the Florida State games where he had the drives. Think about the Michigan State game where he had a couple of really nice cross court passes. I just think tempo, free flowing. Up and down is really the kind of style that you want to play with someone like Cadeau. And I think the beautiful thing of it, the way the roster is made up, is that he'll have 4 or 5 really good finishers, and not just dunkers. Like dunking is a way to finish, sure, great, but Tyson and RJ Davis, you can also consider them as finishers during a fast break. And having Cadeau pushing pace, drawing in defense to dish off to those two, who are just lethal shooters, I think is really kind of Elliot Cadeau at his best when he has the ball in his hands and he knows what he's going to do. 3 steps ahead of what the defense is going to do. He knows where the rotation is coming from. He knows who he's going to pass it to. He knows who's going to cut. So really, him kind of manipulating the defense is when you see Elliot Cadeau at his best. And I think he's able to do that the most when they're playing up tempo and getting up and down the court, going coast to coast, as it were.
I like that. And by the way, we know that he's worked significantly on his shot during the offseason. So the one thing that I think folks.
Let's talk about that, Joey, because right. I think what happens is we always fall victim to the last thing we see. And to be fair, it wasn't just the last thing we saw. I think he made 4 threes in all of ACC play. So he didn't shoot it well. We all know that. But I think it becomes such a storyline because it's just beaten into our brains like, oh, Elliot Cadeau didn't shoot well last year. Elliot Cadeau didn't shoot last year. The guy doesn't have to be a 40% free throw shooter. I mean, 3-point shooter for Carolina to be good. He doesn't have to go full Cam Johnson out there next season and make 93s or anything. He just has to be solid and competent. And I think too often we assume that because someone was terrible, at one thing at one point in their career, that the the improvement has to be significant year over year. It doesn't have to be um, 12% or 14% or anything. It just has to be, you have to move in the right direction. So I don't want people to think if Elliot Cadeau comes out and shoots 34 or 35%, which is very respectable, that, he didn't improve or that he's not a better player. It's just that, there are other things that he's really, really good at. He's improved at certain things and he's going to move forward. So I just, I always worry when something like that becomes such a huge storyline and is repeated over and over. Just because there are so many other good things that he does, and I'm sure so many other things that he's worked on during the offseason. Just
Yeah,
two
and
cents.
no, I'll save the 2 cents. It's another segment. I will say I was coming at that from more along the lines of he will be more reliable, but not necessarily that will be part of his offense or that he will be relied upon by the team to contribute X amount of threes per game. To your point, Sherrell, and I think this is a good one. Even if he just hits one a game, that's going to force defenses to respect him more. And back to Sean's point, you're not going to be able to sag off of him. And then when you start pushing out on him, that's when he's able to beat you to the basket and create even more for his teammates and guys on the wing. And speaking about guys on the wing, and that's not a Tyson's chicken joke. That's a Cade Tyson from Belmont transferring to North Carolina, who is as probably pure of a shooter as they've had since Cam Johnson, that you mentioned, Sherrell. I want to ask you, how do you feel like Cam Johnson? Look at me. How do you feel like Cade Tyson is going to fit in with this roster? Because I think hearing some of the comments that Hubert's made, and then some things that we kind of knew about where they might plug him in, you might see him in a bunch of different spots this year. But one thing I do think this team's going to rely on him for is his perimeter shooting. So, Sherrell, I want you to tell everybody why you think or how you think he's going to contribute within the flow of a very fast-paced offense this year.
Well, obviously, like you said, the first thing is shooting. I mean, that's not a knock. I know people get mad when they're labeled as shooters or non-shooters, but I mean, he's really good at it, and it's an honor, I think, to be called a really good shooter. When you shoot 48% from three for an entire season, you're a great shooter. What surprised me, and I think what will help UNC, he's a lot bigger than I really realized. Like you hear 6'7", and you kind of have an idea of what 6'7", 6'8" looks like, but then you see him, and he's not built like a regular 6'7" guy, 6'8" guy coming out of high school. So you can tell that he's had some time in the college, strength and conditioning program. You can tell that he's played a lot of basketball, and I think that's again hugely important because no matter how talented Ian Jackson and Drake Powell are, they're still going to be freshmen. And so I think there's a bigger difference between high school and college than there is kind of uh, conferences within college. So Tyson will be more apt, have more experience coming in than those two will, and that's going to really help them. I think allow them to be free to do what they do best because he's going to provide shooting, kind of be out there at all times, and UNC will have a chance, depending upon Joey, like you said, where they put him, where they'll have multiple shooters at multiple positions on the court at all times, which again will free things up for the folks whose shooting might not be their forte, but driving, dishing, finishing is. So I think that's what he does. You hear announcers; they always talk about gravity now. Like gravity is in the announcing world, but the
It's
gravity,
like variance on this show.
yeah, variance on this. We've gone 43 minutes without saying variance, but
I wasn't going to let that slide.
the gravity that he'll have, it'll pull in defenders, and that either leaves RJ Davis open, it leaves the dunk spot open, it leaves Cadeau available to drive. It just puts the defense at a disadvantage at all times. So that's what I think. He'll fit in what he'll do for UNC. It's just that he'll be able to play multiple positions, and he seems to be a knockdown shooter. He's got to prove it at the ACC level, but he's proven it for 2 years in college basketball already.
With a guy that's able to score from the perimeter and is able to, just with his pure shooting prowess, like a Cade Tyson, how do you think that a sped up offense is going to help him? Is this going to be one of the situations where folks should just look for him on every possession to run straight to the corner? Is he going to be a guy that maybe North Carolina could set up in some almost in kind of like a a fake secondary break. How do you anticipate him, being able to acclimate to speed? And then I'm going to push you here. Give me a number that you think he needs to hit per game on average to do what North Carolina wants to do this year as a team.
I think in terms of offense, going in transition, I think they're going to want to get him out on that left or right wing where he's most comfortable. Perhaps he's, depending on how the play is going, he can slide down into that corner 3 spot. Once again, I think going back to the report I did, you want to avoid him having to come and turn over his left shoulder. You want him more coming on that right side if he's coming up from the corner. But then also in the secondary, could there be a trailer or one thing that Belmont used a lot to get him open? Flare screens going to that left wing side where he, once again, for him, it's all about the footwork. And if you just watch the footwork, you can probably say yes or no. Is it going to go in before the shot happens? So those are the things just in terms of, I think he'll fit in well. But at the same time, he is going to be tasked with rebounding. And, with that size and length, and well as the defensive matchups, will be interesting to see how that plays into him getting out on that wing at the same side of Cadeau or maybe even a little behind. In terms of a number, I mean, he's been, in the 45-46% 3-point range. He's been in the 14 to 15 points per game at Belmont. But if you're going to, in my mind, get 10 to 12 out of him, I think that's a success, because once again, there's a good 10 to 12, but at the same time, if he is able to be on the court at the end of the game, because I think once again, matchups, especially defensively, as well as the adjustment to the speed of the game, will have an impact. But I think that's all going to be a factor in terms of what, once again, each game is going to be a game on itself. But 10 to 12 points, if he's getting hot and he's making several threes per game, that's definitely a win. But once again, if you don't see him on there at the end of the game because of certain maybe limitations defensively or how they want to run things, then there's probably not concerns, but maybe not what you're expecting.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest question mark in my opinion. Is like, can he guard fours? Because I think his length. Actually, I think his length will allow him to guard some threes, but then with the fours, if it's a 6'9" kind of bruising guy, can he handle that? But if the three is a Ian Jackson type, a 6'5", super athletic type guy, will those get in the way? Will that force UNC to not play him? I think that's the biggest question. And as you said, the rebounding too, because it's going to be different. UNC is going to have to team rebound, and whoever plays the 3 or the 4, they're going to rely on a bunch. There's not going to be anybody with 10 rebounds a game, but there'll probably be 7 or 8 that average, 3 or 4 a game, something like that. It's going to have to be a collective, and he's going to be a big part of it.
I think that Tyson could be one of the players that has the greatest variance on the roster, just from a standpoint of how teams choose to play him. But, I may be projecting too far out as we sit here in October. Fellas, we've gotten to the point of the show where we like to give your 2 cents, so I'll take a penny from each of you here in a second. But before we do that, I do want to give a shout out to everybody who's helping with the relief efforts in the western part of North Carolina. I know this is, a coast-to-coast show, but I'd be lying if I said that, our hearts weren't in the state, and we certainly sympathize and are thinking about the folks that have lost so much as a result of the damage from Hurricane Helene. But I also just want to point to the helpers, the people that are up there right now, doing the real work, trying to save their neighbors, trying to find people, trying to rebuild. It's going to be a long process, but if you're so inclined and want to help, doesn't mean you have to go jump in a truck and go up there, because I don't think they need bodies. I think they need money. I think they need, I think cash is going to be queen. So if you have the ability, contribute to where your heart sees fit. There's a lot of really good organizations out there doing work, but I would encourage you to, give to the ones that have the infrastructure to help with the boots on the ground. And just all that being said, if there's some folks listening to this show and we can give you a little bit of respite from what you're going through, then I'm going to consider that a big win. But just know that we're thinking about you. The Coast to Coast crew has you in our T's and P's, and we hope that the road recovery is a quick one, and that you guys definitely feel the the warmth from the people all around you. That being said, let's get to our 2 cents presented by Congruity HR. Email our guy Matt at congruityhr.com. Matt will get back with you. He will tell you and he will ask you a couple of questions to help understand a little bit about what your small or medium-sized business is going through. And he'll be able to analyze, hey, this is how we may be able to help you from a benefits or human resources or payroll or what have you. They have solutions that can fit any small or medium-sized business. And if you're one of those people that runs or manages or owns a small or medium-sized business, reach out to them. What do you got to lose? It's a free assessment. Matt at congruityhr.com. He'll take care of you. They're a company with a national brand, but they have local feeling. They care about the local area. They care about people succeeding in the Tar Heel State. Hit up Matt. Let Congruity help you out. If they can't help you, they'll tell you, and you've lost nothing. All right, Congruity HR, this segment, our 2 cents. Sean, give me a penny before we get out of here.
All right. We've talked about UNC throughout, so I'm going to go off the radar a little bit in terms of going back to the Thursday in-person viewings, and definitely not a name realistically to put on the radar right now, but the game before Utah Prep and Dybantsa, Don McLean, former UCLA and NBA player Trent McLean, was playing, and Eric Bossi actually did a write-up on him this past week, ranked number 169. So not normally a number that UNC guys will be going after, but he's a guy, whether it's 3 to 4 years, and especially with the transfer portal, 6'8" guy, 6'9", that can shoot the absolute lights out of the ball, was really impressive in terms of catch and shoot from three, a true sniper. And I think he's going to shoot up the rankings most likely, I imagine, would stay West Coast. But once again, you never know 3 or 4 years down the road after a few years of college experience, especially the focus that UNC likes to put on shooting, he could be a hot commodity sometime down the road.
I'm going to call him American Pie Jr. just because I'm the host and I can make jokes like that. Sherrell, give me 1 penny before we get out of here.
I will just go back to recruiting and say some dominoes have fallen. We thought that by mid-October there'd be a good amount of them that have, but look out for the Boozers who were offered by UNC. They're announcing their commitment on Thursday, and I think from what we've heard, there are a decent amount of people who are kind of waiting on that decision because it does have some ramifications for other forwards, some that UNC has been recruiting. Some that UNC hasn't been recruiting, but could impact the ones UNC is recruiting because of where they go. So I think that's a big moment in time when they announce. We'll see what everybody does. But from there, we know UNC wants to take another guard in the class, and we know they want a forward, and we know that they are still after AJ Dybantsa. So there is a lot yet to be determined about UNC's class. And I think we're in the same position that we were 2 weeks ago when we said that for UNC, the class could be Derek Dixon by himself. That's not far-fetched or out of the realm of possibility. Or it could be a mega class that has another guard, another forward, and a really, really good player on top of that. There's just a lot of variance staying between those two, and we just have to wait and see for probably another month or two before that really starts to clear itself out.
Well, we're closer than we've ever been to those things happening. Appreciate everybody tuning into the show tonight or tomorrow or in the morning. Whenever you're listening to this, we're glad that you're listening to us. If you have some feedback for us, let us know. You can hit me up on Twitter machine at Joey_Powell. Always hit us on the message boards if you want to, or you can send us an email, joey@insidecarolina.com. Love to hear your feedback. Appreciate all of you that make this show fun. We feel like we got a little family here, and love doing this show for all of you guys. But for Sherrell McMillan, for Sean Moran, we want to give a special shout out to Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity for sponsoring us, to John Siegley for producing the show, and to all of you out there for listening to us and working us into your podcast content habits. Until next time, I'm Joey Powell. This has been the Coast to Coast Podcast here on InsideCarolina.com. Late.